let me just give a brief introduction to what it is, and then I'll get to my talk, okay? In Europe, for whatever reason, Katyn is better known, and we'll get into that. But let me just give you a very brief introduction to just what we're talking about here. In April 1943, Nazi German authorities claimed that they had discovered thousands of bodies of Polish officers shot by Soviet officials in 1940.
C'est ici, près de Smolensk, dans cette clairière de la forêt de Katyn, que l'on a découvert les corps de 10 000 officiers prisonniers de l'armée polonaise assassinés par les soviets. Près d'1 millier de corps ont déjà été exhumés. Une commission composée d'éminents médecins légistes et experts criminologistes européens, grâce aux lettres et journaux découverts sur les cadavres et d'après l'étude des décompositions des corps, a pu établir que les exécutions remontaient au mois de mars-avril 1940, c'est-à-dire plus d'1 an avant le conflit germano-soviétique. Tous ont été exécutés de la même façon, un coup de revolver dans la nuque. On remarque les mains liées. Un prêtre polonais célèbre un requiem. « 70% des corps, parmi lesquels se trouvent plusieurs généraux, ont déjà pu être identifiés. »
Now remember, the Germans and Allies invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, right? But taking a step back, Germany and Poland went to war on September the 1st, 1939. Okay? So, what happened when Germany invaded Poland was that the Polish army was defeated very quickly. The Soviet Union sent the army in to occupy what had been Western Belarusia and Western Ukraine. These were areas which belonged to Poland because Poland had seized them from the Russian Socialist Republic in 1920 to 1921. The Soviet Union itself wasn't formed until 1923. So they had been part of Russia, but Poland had invaded Russia and seized these two areas and incorporated them into Poland. This is, by anti-communists, often called an invasion of the Soviet Union of Poland. But in fact, the Polish state had ceased to exist, and the Soviets were simply taking back these territories that had been lost in 1920. I go into all of that story in this book, Blood Lies. But just to set the stage so you know what we're talking about, right? In the process of entering and taking over Western Ukraine and Western Belarusia back from Poland and keeping the German armies 300 or 400 kilometers away from the 1939 border of the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union took a lot of Polish army prisoners. Okay, the Polish army was there. They had been driven from the west further and further east, and this was the far eastern parts of Poland. In April 1943, German Nazi authorities claimed that they had discovered thousands of bodies of Polish officers shot by Soviet officials in 1940, before the Nazi invasion, right? These bodies were said to have been discovered near the Katyn forest, near Smolensk in western Russia, which is why the whole affair, including executions and alleged executions of Polish prisoners of war elsewhere in the Soviet Union, came to be called the Katyn massacre. Okay, although not all of whatever happened right there at Katyn, outside Smolensk. So what happened subsequently is the Germans and the Polish government in exile sent representatives. The Polish representatives blamed the Soviet Union for killing these 14 to 22,000 Polish POWs. In 1943, later in 1943, the Soviet Red Army recaptured this area. In 1944, a Soviet report was prepared and made where the Soviets blamed the Germans for killing all these Poles, okay? As a result of the Cold War, the Western former allies, all of the anti-communist forces, adopted the German Polish nationalist version of the story as the truth, namely that the Soviets had murdered all these people. The Soviet Union continued to deny this until 1989, when Gorbachev decided he was going to reveal to the Poles and to everybody else that Stalin and company had really shot these people. In 1991, Gorbachev presented some documents to Yeltsin, who was about to become the president of Russia, right? The Soviet Union was dissolving. Yeltsin in 1992 presented the documents to Lech Walesa, who has become the president of capitalist Poland. And ever since then, this has been the official viewpoint, okay? That the Soviets killed, Stalin and company killed all these Poles. Now, let me start my talk, okay? More detail will sort of emerge, but I wanted to make sure that everybody knew basically what event we're talking about. Why another book on the Katyn massacre? And particularly, why call it a mystery? Right? My book is called The Mystery of the Katyn Massacre. The world at large believes that the mystery, if there ever really was one, was solved long ago in the early 1990s, when the Soviet and then the Russian governments admitted guilt and produced the smoking gun documents of closed packet number 1, the primary source evidence of Soviet guilt in that atrocity. I used to think the same thing myself. When I read in the New York Times that President Gorbachev of the Soviet Union had admitted the guilt of the Stalin government at Katyn, I had no cause to doubt it. We're talking 1990. The revelation in the same newspaper a couple of years later that President Yeltsin of Russia had given these smoking gun documents to Lech Walesa, president of Poland, confirmed what I already thought. But since the mid-1990s, there has appeared research claiming that this is all wrong, that Katyn is a frame-up, anti-Soviet, anti-Russian, and anti-communist. I was intrigued. Katyn was now a mystery, and I like mysteries. But there was more to my attraction to Katyn than that. I, in my student days, became involved in the protest movement against the American war in Vietnam. I sympathized with the Vietnamese struggle for independence. I learned that anti-communism was not exactly a fraud. The United States government was genuinely anti-communist. But that anti-communism also served as camouflage for imperialism and for ordinary capitalist exploitation. France, then Japan, and then the United States had dominated Vietnam. For France and the United States, anti-communism became the rationale for a war to preserve empire. In Vietnam and around the world, it was the communists who were the major force organizing opposition to this imperialist war by the United States. At a huge anti-war demonstration in Manhattan in 1967, someone told me in a friendly manner that I should not oppose the U.S. war in Vietnam. Why not, I asked. Because the other side, the National Liberation Front, was led by the Vietnamese Communist Party, which was led by Ho Chi Minh. Ho Chi Minh had been trained by Joseph Stalin, and Stalin, he said, had murdered 40 million people. So you get the idea, right? You oppose the American war in Vietnam, and you're on the slippery slope to murdering millions of people. Okay. I did not either believe or disbelieve what he said, but I determined that I would look into this matter seriously once I had the time. I was confident that I possessed the tools to do this. I could read Russian, German, and French. Studying Polish was to come later. I also knew that to do valid historical research, the student must identify, locate, obtain, study, and draw the correct conclusions from primary sources. I had learned that in graduate school, where I studied medieval comparative literature, and I teach medieval literature as my profession at university. My professors insisted on the vital importance of primary source evidence. They taught us never to be afraid to question, and in fact to challenge, the prevailing orthodoxy within the field, no matter how monolithic, how indestructible it appeared to be, if the primary source evidence demanded it. I also embarked on the study of Soviet history as a project in self-clarification. I had questions about the Stalin period in the Soviet Union that challenged my opposition to the Vietnam War, to American imperialism, and to the conventionally accepted Cold War paradigm of understanding history and politics. I had the tools, I had a little courage, learned perhaps from my participation in the anti-war movement, so I began to research the Stalin years.